our first unit, we took a look at Jewish migration from Eastern Europe to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And we mentioned a number of themes of migration, such as statistics, push factors, pull factors, the journey. Now what we want to do is to take a look at Jewish life in New York City, the settlements that were created in New York City that express Jewish life for these immigrants. In this unit, we will cover such things as chain migration, settlement, work and mobility, the reception given the immigrants, the reaction to them, and then their adjustment to American life, the assistance that they received, and the assimilation process itself. Let's take a look at the phenomenon of chain migration, which basically occurs when a pioneer immigrant goes to a land, this Jewish migrant, say from Russia, and lands in the Lower East Side, and then writes letters enticing friends and relatives to come join them. Chain migration of friends and family members are often those who shared the sensibilities and identities of the original migrant. They would often be sons and daughters, young children, wives, parents, who were brought over on affordable transportation, those railroads and steamships. When we talk about work and mobility on the Lower East Side, there's a real diversity of reaction to the American economy. There was an upward mobility, movement from the role of a worker to a petty merchant, or maybe even a small businessman. There was also effective labor organizers who modestly yet constantly were able to provide, through negotiations, rise in wages and benefits. It was not unusual for children of workers to become professionals or hold white-collar jobs. But for the Jewish community, this is essential. Education was the key to mobility. In 1918, 9.7% of college enrollment was a Jewish enrollment. In dentistry, law, and with the medical field, at least 1 out of every 5 students was of Jewish heritage. Education, the key to upward mobility, a constant in Jewish immigration culture. Also, very important to work and mobility, as we mentioned, was that of unions. And the unionization of the garment industry was incredibly important to work and mobility for the Jewish migrant. 2 unions in particular were populated by Jewish immigrants and were very successful. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union was formed in 1900, as was the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union. By the way, Cornell University has amazing historical information on both of these unions. A little bit about these unions. They were both aligned with Eugene V. Debs' Socialist Party of America. And as you well know, the ILGWU was involved in the shirtwaist strike. That was resolved by leaders of the American Jewish community, both members of the union and the owners of the factories. And as a matter of fact, a protocol of peace was derived in which owners acknowledged an obligation to the Jews that worked in their factories. However, Triangle is most noted for the horrific shirtwaist fire that occurred. On your teacher outline, we've listed a number of teacher resources from Cornell University, the National Education Association, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, as well as Chronicling America, American Historic Newspapers. There's a plethora of wonderful resources to teach this horrific event from the immigrant experience in New York City, 1913. Let's now turn to the adjustment of life in America, the assistance that the immigrants got, and the process of assimilation. What are some of the major themes? Well, if we take a look at Jewish immigration, what we have to understand is theme number one, that Jews will define themselves. With the simple explosion in numbers after 1880 of a Jewish population, Jews will define themselves as they negotiate the two worlds of the old and the new in New York City. They will build a community with institutions based on the will of the community. They will create and celebrate their communal distinctiveness. You will definitely see a commitment to both a Jewish past and a future here in America. There will be assistance to the newcomers, relief, security, comfort for the newcomers provided by Jewish communities. Americanization means economic advancement. So learning the language and the mores of America are extremely important for economic advancement. Community institutions will help the immigrants negotiate their assimilation. Assimilation being key. America is economic possibility and religious freedom. Speaking of religion, let's take a look at the role of religion. There is tremendous religious diversification in the aspect of Judaism in the community. You'll have German Jews who had come before 1880, who are basically of the Reform mind, and the more Russian, Eastern European Jews being conservative, even Orthodox. They will debate Jewish practice and the meaning of Judaism. They will all search for religious accommodation to America. They will find ways to resist American ways as well as adapt Judaism to this modern world of America. As a matter of fact, Judaism will be an evolving religious system throughout this process, as best evidenced by the Pittsburgh Platform, which was discussed as a modern approach to faith. Basically, Jewish practice in New York City will be that of mixing and matching. Most Jews will never belong to a congregation, but most will maintain and retain the practices from their childhood. They will make American innovations. They will make a living. One of the common denominators of American Jewry is communal service. Service to one another. Community coming together to form such institutions as Jewish orphanages, settlement houses, the Educational Alliance, which emphasizes Americanizing activities, the Landsmannschaften, which are basically lodges, fraternal organizations, where health insurance, loans, doctor services, and burial benefits are available. There will be thousands of these in New York City, greater than the number of synagogues. And then there is also the informal, the interest-free loan, the dowry for the poor bride, a night's lodging, shelter, or food. Communal service, a common denominator of the American Jewish community. But as emphasized before, Jewish education is extremely important. As was said by Sampson Benderly, a Jewish education reformer in 1908, what we want in this country is not Jews who can successfully keep up their Jewishness in a few large ghettos, but men and women who have grown up in freedom and can assert themselves wherever they are. Jewish education will take many forms. Early on, there will be day schools, alternative schools, if you will, to the public schools. Public schools had a Protestant agenda early on, and for a fee, Jewish students could receive a general education and Judaic instructions. Those who could not afford the fee went to Sunday school, where they learned Hebrew or studied the Jewish texts and Judaic rituals. As Catholics, who were also a part of this wave of immigration after 1880, were able to force changes to the Protestant curriculum, Jewish parents felt that they could now send their kids to public schools. Public schools. Education, meaning upward and economic mobility. By 1917, nearly all Jewish children were in public school. But in Jewish education, the role of females was also a very important characteristic. Not only were girls educated, but female teachers were prevalent and had much to say about the education of Jewish children. There also were ideological schools that were established in conjunction with the public schools. The Workmen's Circle, formed in 1900, was union-based and taught Yiddish and Jewish history and culture, folk music as well. And Labor Zionism, which had a socialist agenda, a nationalistic Zionist bent, was also an accompaniment to public education. But clearly, the education of Jewish children was paramount in this community. One of the innovations that was prevalent in this area of the Lower East Side was the Henry Street Settlement House. Now, most of us know of Jane Addams and the formation of Hull House in Chicago, but at about the same time was the formation of Henry Street Settlement House by two nurses, Lillian Wald and Mary Brewster. In 1895, Jacob Schiff donated a house to them on Henry Street. It became a community of reform with community-based services performed by college-educated women who worked and lived in the community. They were to provide immediate improvement in the health and welfare of the nearly 500,000 people who lived in this neighborhood. They provided resources to the poor so as to break the cycle of poverty. For example, they made sure that public schools had nurses, that milk was pure, that those with tuberculosis received treatment. They proposed playground construction, demanded streets being cleaned, and housing inspected. But Henry Street, like other settlement houses in the United States, also became a center of culture for theater, music, and dance, particularly for immigrant children. The impact of early settlement houses like Henry Street meant that more than 400 were started in the United States by 1910. And as a matter of fact, in this very settlement house you see was that NAACP conference in 1909, which passed the resolution denouncing the pogroms in Russia. In the realm of Jewish politics, the majority of Jewish voters were affiliated with the two major parties in America. However, two ideologies were also very prevalent in the Jewish community: socialism, which was labor-based in the Yiddish culture and language and propagated the Jewish folk spirit, as well as Zionism, which determined that the Jewish destiny was in Palestine or other feasible locations and sought the rejuvenation of Hebrew. One of the fascinating aspects of Jewish culture in New York City in particular was a multilingual Jewish press. This was an American invention whose purpose was to give the news and keep Yiddish alive. It covered numerous Jewish events in the city, in the nation, in the world. By 1925, the Jewish press had over 500,000 readers, enticing them with articles on American politics, economic and social conditions, women's suffrage, unemployment insurance, elections, campaigns, you name it. The audience was set on Americanization, and oftentimes articles helped immigrants navigate the many issues of American life, even with advice columns. Two publications are worth mentioning. The Forward, which was published in 11 cities and was the largest foreign daily in the United States, was a socialist-based garment workers, non-religious paper. It is still in publication in Yiddish and English. Der Morgenjournal had an early morning edition with a help wanted section, and as a result, it had over 100,000 subscribers by 1916. How did an American population react to this influx of East European Jews at this time? It wasn't kind. In many papers, you would see political cartoons, ugly cartoons, depicting Jews as money-hungry, aggressive capitalists, inestimable, radicals, stingy, and full of greed. Analyzing political cartoons from the past can help us understand that stereotypical cartooning and demonizing of the other, no matter what immigrant group, has been prevalent in American society. We have provided you a cartoon analysis guide, which you can use in any era with any cartoon. I have the cartoon on the right, which was drawn by Theodore Geisel during the Second World War. There were also cartoons that emphasized equality and non-discriminatory behavior. But probably one of the most noted anti-Semitic publications were that came from an American industrialist by the name of Henry Ford. Henry Ford's publication, the Dearborn Independent, ran from 1901 to 1927. In 1920, it started printing anti-Semitic articles, and within 91 issues, published these articles. The circulation of the Dearborn Independent was 900,000 because they were provided through Ford dealerships throughout the country. The International Jew was a four-volume set of the most popular anti-Semitic articles published in the Dearborn Independent from 1920 to 1922. The themes are really quite disturbing. Themes such as the Jews caused a decline in American culture, values, products, and entertainment. Jewish financiers had caused World War I. That Jews contribute nothing to American society. That they were in a worldwide conspiracy by Jewish capitalists. And in this period, of the early 20s with the Red Scare raging through the United States. Oh yes, communism was also considered a Jewish creation. Now, you may wonder what the impact of articles in a Henry Ford independent newspaper would be. But these were widely read, not just in the United States, but in Germany as well, and they became fodder for Nazi propaganda. As a matter of fact, the only American to win an award from the Nazis was, yes, Henry Ford. But in 1927, a Chicago attorney who was implicated by Ford in a plot to take over U.S. agriculture won a libel suit. In 1927, we saw Ford apologizing for the articles. He stopped the publication of the Independent. Was it a change in conscience? Or the boycott of Ford cars by Jewish consumers? Not sure, but the Independent only lasted until 1927. These examples with the cartoons and the Ford publications, let's remember that this was a time of nativism in the United States, raging nativism. After the First World War and the millions of people that had come from Southern and Eastern Europe, including the Jews, nativism raged through the United States. For Jews, what did nativism mean? Internships and residencies would be scarce. They would be kept out of prestigious law firms and academia. Redlining, housing discrimination would prevent them from living in the neighborhood of their choice. They were denied teaching positions. And this got worse after 1915, when after a generation we had a substantial movement of Jews into the middle class. There were quotas for Jewish students in major universities. Jews were not admitted to country clubs. Discrimination based in the nativism of the early 20s, unfortunately, would persist for decades.